They came for me on a Wednesday. The kind of quiet Wednesday when you expect nothing more than a phone call from your sister or the postman dropping off bills. But instead, it was the police. I remember the sound of their knock, firm, official. Not the kind of knock that belongs to family or friends. My hands were still damp from washing dishes. I wiped them on my apron and peeked through the curtain, thinking maybe it was a delivery man who got the wrong house. But then I saw the uniform, the badge glinting in the afternoon light, and something cold crawled up my spine. Mrs. Delaney. The taller one asked when I opened the door. His tone was cautious, almost apologetic. "We need to ask you a few questions." There's something about hearing your full name from a stranger that makes you feel smaller. I invited them in, though my gut told me not to. My heart thudded in my ears as they stepped onto the rug. I'd bought from the thrift store last spring. When they said the words accusation, abuse, theft, it was as though the air left the room. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I just stared at them, the two men who held a clipboard and a tablet, faces soft with forced professionalism. Who said that? I asked, my voice trembling. The shorter one shifted uncomfortably. "Your daughter-in-law, ma'am?" "Mrs. Laura Delaney." "My daughter-in-law?" Those words hit harder than anything else. I sank into the nearest chair because my legs would no longer hold me. And as the officers continued talking, explaining procedure, asking for statements, all I could think about was how last Sunday, that same woman had sat at my table eating the pot roast I made, laughing about her new nail color while my grandchildren played in the yard. Now, apparently, she thought I was a criminal back then. Before all of this, before police visits, court hearings, and whispered gossip, my days were simple, predictable even. I'm 62, retired from teaching after 38 years in the classroom. My husband, Henry, passed away 5 years ago. Cancer, quick, quiet, unfair. Since then, I've lived alone in the small house we bought when my son Michael was just 10. It's old, creaky in winter, but it has good bones. Most mornings, I'd start with coffee by the kitchen window, watching the world wake up. The neighbors walking their dogs. The mailman's steady rhythm. Then I'd head to the garden, tending to my tomatoes and marigolds, Henry used to say. I could coax a dead stick into blooming. Michael visited every weekend with Laura and the kids. I loved those visits. The sound of laughter filling the house again. My grandkids Emma, 7, and little Noah, 4, running barefoot through the living room, leaving sticky fingerprints on my walls. I didn't mind. That's what walls are for. Laura was always polite, even warm, though never quite affectionate. She'd bring desserts, compliment my cooking, thank me for babysitting. There was always a smile on her lips, but something behind her eyes never matched it. I used to tell myself it was just exhaustion to kids, a job, a husband who worked long hours. Who wouldn't look tired? Still, there were moments that made me pause, like the time I offered to watch the kids overnight so she and Michael could have a date. She'd hesitated, just a flicker, before saying, "Oh, I don't know if the kids would be comfortable without me." Or when I tried to show Emma how to knead bread, and Laura swooped in, laughing but firm, saying, "Oh, don't make her do chores, Mom. She's too little." Little things, harmless things. I brushed them off because in my heart I believed we were a family, imperfect. Yes, but bound by love. On Sundays, after dinner, Laura would sometimes sit beside me while Michael washed the dishes. We'd chat about her work at the clinic, about Emma's school, about the rising grocery prices. She always seemed so composed, so in control. I admired that about her. I never imagined she'd be capable of something like this. The day after the police visit, I couldn't eat. My hands shook too much to pour coffee. My phone buzzed constantly, Michael, calling again and again. When I finally answered, his voice was tight. "Mom, Laura said she had to do it. She said she's been worried about the kids." "Worried?" I echoed. "About what, Michael?" "That I feed them too much. That I read them stories at bedtime." He didn't answer right away. I could hear him exhale, a sound like shame. "She says you yelled at Emma last weekend." "At you?" He swallowed. Grabbed her arm. I closed my eyes. I remembered that moment. Emma had almost dropped a glass bowl. I'd reached out instinctively, catching her hand before it fell. She'd cried, not from pain, but from surprise. I hugged her right after. "She'd been fine, Michael," I whispered. "I would never hurt my granddaughter." "I know, Mom," he said quietly. "But Laura, she's scared. And she said she found things missing from her purse." That stung more than anything. I'd raised that boy on honesty. I'd taught him to tell the truth even when it hurt. And now he was repeating someone else's lies to me as if they might be true. "Do you believe her?" I asked. He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. That night I sat on my porch long after sunset, listening to the crickets hum in the dark. My neighbor's lights flickered off one by one. Until the street was quiet, I thought about my son as a child, his little hands gripping mine as we crossed the street. His voice calling me Mama in that soft, trusting tone only children have, and now he believed I might steal, that I might hurt his daughter. I cried quietly. The way old women cry with their bodies still, shoulders trembling, tears falling into their lap. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The air smelled like rain. I whispered to the empty night, "Why, Laura? Why would you do this?" But of course, the night had no answers. Not yet. The first time I felt something wasn't right between Laura and me. It was small enough to ignore. It started with a whisper. Not from her, but from how the house felt when she was in it. You know that quiet tension that hums in the air, like static before a storm? That's what it was. After the police visit, days went by in a fog. I tried to live normally, watering my plants, folding laundry, pretending everything was fine. But every knock at the door made my heart skip. Every text from Michael made me brace myself. He told me things were being looked into, that Laura just needed to feel heard, that the authorities have to do their job. I didn't understand what any of it meant. I hadn't been charged with anything, but the shame was already thick in the air. When I went to the grocery store, I felt like people stared too long. Maybe it was in my head, maybe not, but I could feel the weight of invisible eyes following me down the aisles. And yet, the strangest part wasn't the fear, it was the confusion. Why would Laura lie? It wasn't money. She and Michael lived comfortably. It wasn't jealousy. She had the children, the husband, the life. I was just the mother-in-law. Still. Small cracks began to show. One afternoon, Emma called me from her tablet. I smiled when I saw her little face on the screen, that gap between her front teeth. "Hi, my sweetheart," I said. "How's school?" She giggled and whispered, "Mommy said I shouldn't call you for a while." I froze. "Why not, baby?" She looked over her shoulder as if afraid. "Mommy said you're in trouble." My chest tightened. "Do you think Grandma did something bad?" Emma frowned, confused. "No, but Mommy said you took her bracelet." Huh? I couldn't breathe for a second. The bracelet, a thin gold one with tiny charms, was something Laura had shown me months ago, after Michael gave it to her for their anniversary. I hadn't even touched it. I smiled as gently as I could. "That's not true, my love. Grandma didn't take anything." She looked at me for a long moment, and then, in the way only children can, she said softly, "I know." The call ended soon after. When the screen went dark, I sat there for a long time, staring at my own reflection. That was when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was something else. Something colder. A week later, I decided to visit their house. I told myself it was just to talk, to clear things up. Maybe Laura was stressed. Maybe we could fix it. Families fight. Families forgive. Michael opened the door, surprise flickering across his face. He looked tired. "The kind of tired that sits in the bones, Mom. You shouldn't be here right now," he said quietly. I smiled, pretending I didn't hear the warning in his tone. "I just wanted to see my grandbabies." He hesitated, then stepped aside. The house smelled of lavender cleaner and something baking. The kids' toys were neatly stacked in a corner. Everything looked perfect, too perfect. Laura was in the kitchen, her back to me. When she turned, her smile was thin, brittle. "Oh, I didn't expect you," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "I needed to talk," I said, face to face. Her eyes flickered to Michael, then back to me. "About what? About why you told the police those things?" Her jaw tightened. "Because they're true." I laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. "You think I hurt your daughter? You think I stole from you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned against the counter, her expression measured. "Emma told me you grabbed her." She was terrified. "She dropped a bowl," I said softly. I caught her hand so it wouldn't fall. "That's all." Laura tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing. "You always have a story, don't you?" The way she said it, quiet, smooth, practiced, made my stomach turn. "Laura," I whispered, "what is this really about?" For a moment, I saw something flicker behind her calm irritation, maybe even contempt. Then she smiled that polite smile again. "I think you should leave now, not until you tell me why." She straightened, crossing her arms. "Because you don't know when to stop. You show up whenever you want. You criticize how I raise my kids. You act like this house is still yours. It's not Margaret. It's mine now." Her voice was sharp now, the softness gone. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't about bracelets or bowls. It was about control in her eyes. I was a shadow that wouldn't leave the mother who still held too much of her husband's heart. The grandmother whose presence meant influence. She couldn't manage. She wanted me gone. I left that day without another word. That evening, I sat in Henry's old armchair and stared at the framed photos on the mantel. Michael as a boy in his soccer uniform. Emma in her ballet tutu. Laura smiling beside him in their wedding portrait. A smile I used to think was genuine, but the longer I looked, the more hollow that smile appeared. I made myself a cup of tea, though I barely tasted it. I replayed our conversation in my head, her tone, her composure, the careful choice of words. It wasn't anger. It was calculation, and I realized something chilling. This was just the beginning. If she could lie to the police once, she could do it again. If she could twist a moment of love into a story of abuse, she could destroy me piece by piece. The question was, why now? Why, after all these years? As the rain began to fall outside, I stared at my empty cup and whispered, "What are you planning, Laura?" The next morning, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Thick paper. No return address. My stomach sank before I even opened it. Inside was a printed notice. Child Welfare Services, a report had been filed. They wanted to schedule an interview regarding allegations of emotional instability and potential neglect during visitation. I felt the world tilt beneath me. Laura wasn't done. She was tightening the noose. When I read those words, emotional instability and potential neglect, it was as if someone had scraped the air out of my lungs. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. The refrigerator hummed in the background, a sound that suddenly felt intrusive. This was no misunderstanding anymore. This was a campaign. I remember whispering to myself, "She's trying to erase me." I called Michael. My voice was steady, but inside my chest was burning. "Michael, did you know about this?" He was quiet for too long. Then he said, "Mom, Laura thought it would be better to let the system sort things out." "The system," I repeated, stunned. "I'm not a criminal. I'm your mother." "I know," he said quickly. "I know. But you need to understand how it looks. She's scared. The kids are fine," I cut in. "They love me. You know that." He sighed. The way people sigh when they've already chosen a side. "Mom, maybe it's best if you don't visit until this clears up." I felt something inside me fracture. Until this clears up, that's what people say when they don't want to fight for you. When they'd rather keep the peace than seek the truth. That weekend, I didn't hear from anyone. The house was too quiet. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like a memory dot. By Monday, I decided I needed help. I found a lawyer, a small, wiry man named Mr. Goldberg, recommended by an old colleague from the school. He looked through the papers, his eyebrows knitting together. "This is serious," he said. "They're trying to build a record, even if there's no proof. Repeated reports can create a narrative. You'll need to protect yourself." I nodded slowly, trying to absorb his words. "But why would she do this?" He leaned back in his chair. "People lie for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes it's control. Sometimes resentment. Sometimes money. Money." I asked. He tapped the papers. "Has your son mentioned anything about your property? Your house?" I frowned. "No, but I told him I was updating my will recently." He didn't seem interested. Mr. Goldberg's gaze lingered. "People often change when inheritance becomes real." The thought made my stomach turn. I wanted to protest, to say my son isn't like that. But doubt had already crept in, silent and heavy. A few days later, I got another letter. This one was handwritten in Laura's neat, careful script. "Margaret, I'm sorry things have gotten this far, but I think it's best if you don't contact the children or come to the house for a while. They're confused and need space. Please respect our boundaries." Laura, no warmth, no kindness, just clinical detachment dressed up in politeness. I folded the letter back into its envelope. And for the first time, I felt something stronger than sadness. Anger. Not the shouting kind. The kind that's quiet, that settles deep in the bones and says, "No more." That night, I drove past their house. I told myself I wasn't spying. I just needed to see my grandkids. Even from a distance, the lights were on. Through the living room window, I could see Emma dancing in her pajamas while Noah waved a toy car. Michael was on the couch watching them. And Laura, she was at the table with her laptop, her face lit by the blue glow of the screen. For a moment, I almost smiled. They looked happy, normal. But then Laura looked up and saw me. Our eyes met through the window. Her expression didn't change. No surprise, no guilt. Just calm, collected stillness. Then, without breaking eye contact, she stood and pulled the curtain closed. That single motion said everything. I drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. A week later, Mr. Goldberg called. "Mrs. Delaney," he said, "I've looked into the report. It seems your daughter-in-law submitted photographs as evidence." My heart jumped. "Photographs of what?" He hesitated. "Of a bruise on your granddaughter's arm." I closed my eyes. I could picture it already. A faint mark from when Emma had tripped on the front steps last summer. I'd given her ice and held her until she stopped crying. "She's twisting everything." I whispered. "I know," he said gently. "But we'll need proof. Witnesses, statements, anything that shows you've been in good standing." So I started gathering everything. Letters from neighbors. Notes from the families of children I used to teach. Even Emma's old drawings that said, "I love Grandma." Each piece felt like a fragment of my innocence. Something I shouldn't have had to prove. But that's what happens when someone stains your name. You start living in defense of yourself. 2 weeks later, Michael came to my house. He looked thinner, his shoulders tense. I opened the door, half relieved, half angry. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside silently. He sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where he'd done his homework as a boy, the same chair where Henry used to read the newspaper. He looked around as if the memories were ghosts. "Laura wants to file for full custody," he said finally. I stared at him. "Full custody? Michael, she already has custody. They're your children." He rubbed his forehead. "She wants to make sure the court knows she's the stable one, just in case anything happens." "In case what happens?" He hesitated. "She thinks. If something happened to me, you'd try to get custody." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "She thinks I want to steal your children." She's being careful," he said weakly. "No, Michael," I said, my voice low. "She's being cruel." He looked up, and for the first time, I saw doubt flicker in his eyes. But then he looked away, cowardly, like a man who wanted peace at any cost. I leaned forward. "Michael, listen to me. Your wife is lying. She's building a case against me for reasons I don't understand yet. But this isn't about the kids. It's about power. She wants control over you, over your family, over me." He shook his head. "You're wrong, am I?" I whispered. Then why can't I see my grandchildren? He didn't answer when he left. He hugged me awkwardly out of habit. Not love. I stood at the window as he drove away, my reflection in the glass merging with the empty street for the first time in my life. I felt truly alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every detail, every strange look, every careful smile, every word Laura had spoken that now sounded different in hindsight. And then, just before dawn, I remembered something, a small, forgotten detail. Months earlier, Laura had asked me for copies of my property deed for insurance records. I'd given them to her without question. My heart began to pound. I went to the cabinet where I kept my documents. The folder was there, but lighter. Missing papers. I opened it, hands trembling. The original deed was gone. It hit me like a blow. She wasn't just trying to take the children from me. She was trying to take everything. The morning after I discovered the missing deed, I sat at the kitchen table with my tea gone cold and my mind racing. The house felt too still, like it was holding its breath with me. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. Counting out seconds that felt heavier than minutes for the first time, I understood what kind of woman Laura truly was. Not just controlling, not just manipulative, but deliberate. She had been planning this, and if she was willing to accuse me falsely, to drag my name through police records, to isolate me from my grandchildren, then a missing deed wasn't just a mistake. It was a warning. I took a deep breath and picked up the phone. "Mr. Goldberg," I said when he answered. "I think I know what she's after." He met me that afternoon, at his office above the bakery downtown, the one that always smelled faintly of butter and sugar. I handed him the file folder. "The original deed is missing," I said, "and she has copies. She asked for them months ago." He leafed through the papers, his brow furrowing. "Did you ever sign anything recently?" "A document," she said, "was for insurance or taxes." I hesitated. "A few months ago, she and Michael came over. They said they were refinancing their mortgage and needed my signature on something about the house. Value for a family financial statement. I didn't read it. I just signed. It seemed harmless." He looked up sharply. "Do you have a copy of that?" "No." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Margaret, she may have used your signature to authorize a transfer. It happens more than you'd think, especially with family." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Are you saying she forged something?" "I'm saying it's possible," he replied gently. "And if she did, we'll find out." That evening, as the sky bruised purple over the neighborhood, I sat on my porch and let the cold air sting my cheeks. I thought of Henry, how he'd always said, "The truth has a way of fighting for itself, Maggie, if you give it a chance," so I decided to fight. I began making notes, recording dates, keeping every letter, every call. I called the county clerk's office to request a copy of my property record. The woman on the line paused when she looked up my name. "Oh, Mrs. Delaney. It shows your property was recently added to a joint estate agreement under Michael and Laura Delaney." My heart stopped. "No, that's not right," I said. "This house is mine. My husband left it to me." She hesitated. "It was processed 3 months ago. The paperwork lists you as a consenting party." I hung up the phone and just sat there, the silence pressing against my ears. 3 months ago. That was the same week they'd come with those papers for me to sign quickly. I remember Laura's voice that day, syrupsweet.com. "Just a small form, Margaret. We'll fill in the details later." And I had trusted her. The next day, I called Michael again. He sounded distracted, like he was caught between two worlds, one that was his wife's and one that used to be mine. "Michael," I said, "I need you to listen carefully. Did Laura tell you she added my house to your estate?" There was a pause. "What are you talking about?" "She forged my consent. She's trying to take my home." He let out a nervous laugh, one that didn't reach his voice. "Mom, that's ridiculous. Laura wouldn't check the county records. Michael, please, just look." He sighed. "Mom, you're letting this stress get to you. You've been saying crazy things lately. Maybe you should talk to someone." That stung deeper than any accusation. "Is that what she told you?" "That I'm losing my mind." He didn't answer, so I did. If you don't believe me, then believe the documents. And when this all comes out, remember I tried to warn you." I hung up. The loneliness that followed wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like a fog that filled every room. I started noticing the little ways Laura had isolated me. Friends stopped calling. My neighbor Denise stopped waving from her porch. Even the church committee quietly reassigned my volunteer work until things settled. I realized Laura wasn't only attacking me legally. She was dismantling my reputation. That's when I decided to stop hiding. I went to the police station myself. I asked for the officer who had come to my house weeks earlier, a man named Sergeant Blake. When he saw me, recognition flickered across his face, followed by discomfort. "Mrs. Delaney," he said, "how can I help you?" "I want to make a statement," I said, "a formal one about false accusations and forged documents." He looked uncertain. "Do you have proof?" "I will." Told him everything, every detail, every letter, every odd encounter. By the time I was done, his expression had shifted from polite patience to quiet concern. "All right," he said finally. "I'll file your statement, and I'll request the records of your property transfer. If what you're saying checks out, this could be serious." When I left, I felt lighter, not because the nightmare was over, but because I'd finally taken the first real step toward ending it. 2 weeks later, Mr. Goldberg called me with the results. "Margaret," he said, "you were right. The signature on the property file doesn't match your legal signature. It's close, but not identical. We can prove it was forged." I closed my eyes. Relief flooded through me, and then anger. "Will she go to jail?" I asked. He paused. "That depends on how far you want to take this. We can file a criminal complaint, or we can use this to have the report against you dismissed and clear your name." I thought about that for a long time. Part of me wanted to see her punished, truly, publicly. But another part of me, the teacher in me, the mother in me, knew that revenge wouldn't heal the hole she'd already carved in our family. "I just want my name back," I said quietly. "And I want my grandchildren to know who I really am." The next Sunday, I got a call. It was Michael. His voice was small, trembling. "Mom, I saw the documents. I'm so sorry. I didn't say anything. I just let the silence sit between us, thick with everything he hadn't believed. She told me you wanted to sign it over," he continued, "that it was your way of helping us. I didn't question it." "You should have," I said softly. "I know," he whispered. "She's gone, Mom. She took the kids and went to her sister's. I don't even know where exactly." I swallowed hard. "Do you still believe her?" He hesitated just long enough to hurt. "I don't know what to believe anymore." That night, I stood in the living room, the deed copies spread across my coffee table, the official notice from my lawyer beside them. My innocence was written in ink now, verifiable, undeniable. But there was no joy in it, just exhaustion. Because the truth may set you free. Yes, but it doesn't undo the damage of disbelief. Still, I wasn't finished. If she thought she could take my home, my name, my family, she was going to see what a mother could do when pushed too far the next morning. I began preparing my case for court. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was reclaiming everything she tried to steal. Court days have a smell. It's something between dust, old paper, okay, and nerves. I hadn't been inside a courtroom since my teaching days, okay, when I once accompanied a student for a juvenile hearing. But this time, the stakes were my life, my reputation, my family, my name. When I walked in, Laura was already there, sitting beside her lawyer. She looked polished, calm, dressed in a pale cream suit that made her seem almost angelic. But I knew what hid behind that serenity. Michael sat a few rows back, his face drawn, eyes tired. When he looked at me, I couldn't read what was in them. Guilt, maybe shame, but not yet remorse. Mr. Goldberg leaned toward me. "Remember, Margaret, we're not here to attack her. We're here to reveal the truth." I nodded, though my hands were trembling inside my lap. The judge was a stern woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She called the case Delaney versus Delaney. Hearing my own name repeated like that made my stomach twist. The court clerk read the charges: property dispute, false accusations, defamation. Laura's lawyer spoke first. He painted me as a confused elderly woman, overwhelmed by grief and age, prone to misremembering. He said Laura's actions were born out of concern for the children, not malice. When it was my turn, I stood. My legs felt weak, but my voice didn't tremble. Your Honor, I said, I've been a teacher for nearly 4 decades. I've worked with children, protected them, loved them as if they were my own. The idea that I would ever harm my granddaughter or steal from my daughter-in-law is not only false, it's cruel. I glanced toward Laura then, and for a moment her mask slipped. Just a flicker, a tightening of her jaw, shift in her eyes. Mr. Goldberg presented the evidence, the mismatched signatures, the timeline of the deed transfer, the witness statements from my neighbors, the notes from Emma's teachers describing her affection for me. And then the officer, Sergeant Blake, testified. We found that the allegations of abuse and theft were unsubstantiated, he said. There was no physical evidence, and both children appeared well cared for in Mrs. Delaney's presence. Furthermore, upon reviewing the deed in question, we noted inconsistencies with the recorded signature. The courtroom was silent except for the soft shuffle of papers. Laura's face remained composed, but her fingers twisted the edge of her jacket. Afterward, during recess, I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom. People walked past in muted conversations, heels clicking on tile. I felt the weight of years pressing down all the moments of trust, all the dinners shared, all the smiles that now felt like lies. Michael approached quietly. Mom, I didn't look at him. He sat beside me anyway. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't. Turned my head slowly. But you believed her. His throat moved as he swallowed hard. She said you'd been acting strange. She said you resented her, that you wanted to turn the kids against her. I laughed softly, bitterly. Resent her. Michael, I wanted to help her. I wanted peace. I know, he said. I know that now. There was a long silence between us. I could feel the regret rolling off him like waves. But I was too tired to comfort him. I just wanted to protect my family. He said finally, and in doing that, I whispered, you destroyed it. When court resumed, something unexpected happened. Laura's lawyer called her to the stand. I could tell she wasn't expecting it either, because her composure faltered for a split second. But she went up, chin high, smile poised, double quotes, Mrs. Delaney. He began. Can you explain why you filed those reports against your mother-in-law? She smiled faintly. I was concerned. The children came home upset. Emma said Grandma had shouted. I just wanted to keep them safe. Did you ever witness any abuse? No. Any theft? No, but he cut in gently. So your reports were based on hearsay. She shifted in her seat. They were based on concern. You can't take chances with children. Then it was Mr. Goldberg's turn. He was calm, almost too calm, the kind of calm that means a storm is coming. Mrs. Delaney, he said, are you familiar with this document? He held up the copy of my property transfer. Yes, she said, her voice measured. That's the form Margaret signed. Are you certain she signed it herself? Of course. I was there. Kay smiled faintly. Would you read aloud the witness signature line? She frowned and looked down. Michael Delaney. I don't know if you're saying both you and your husband watched her sign it? Yes. Mr. Goldberg turned toward the judge. Your Honor, we've obtained a written statement from Mr. Delaney that he was not present at the time of signing and that his wife handled the documents alone. Murmur rippled through the courtroom. Laura's eyes darted toward Michael, wide for the first time. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Delaney, did you forge this signature? Her composure cracked then. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The silence stretched until it broke under its own weight. Finally, she said, I was just trying to protect what's ours. The judge's tone turned to steel. That's not protection, Mrs. Delaney. That's fraud. The ruling came 2 weeks later. The deed was restored in my name. The false police reports were dismissed. My record cleared. Laura was ordered to pay restitution and attend counseling for malicious defamation. The truth had prevailed, but the victory didn't feel sweet, because no ruling can undo the nights I spent awake, wondering if I was losing my mind. No amount of justice can erase the look on my granddaughter's face when she said, "Mommy said you're in trouble." The neighborhood learned what had happened. Slowly, people began to smile at me again in the grocery aisles, to wave from across the street. My pastor stopped by with a pie and a quiet, "We're glad to have you back." But I wasn't the same woman anymore. I'd always believed family meant unconditional love. That blood could never turn against you. But now I understood something harder. That love can be twisted when mixed with pride, fear, and control. One afternoon, months later, Michael came to visit. He stood on my porch for a long time before knocking, as if the weight of shame was keeping his hand frozen. When I opened the door, he looked older, like the guilt had carved years into his face. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside. He didn't say much at first. He just looked around the living room, the photographs, the plants, the same old clock ticking on the wall. Finally, he said, "She left. For good, took the kids and moved out of state." I closed my eyes. "I didn't fight her," he added. "Not after everything. I thought maybe she'd come back different one day. But I don't think she will." Poured us both tea the way I always used to. The sound of the liquid filling the cups felt almost healing. "Do you hate her?" he asked. I shook my head. "No. Hate eats the one who holds it." He looked down. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I reached across the table, placing my hand on his. "You were blinded by love, Michael. It happens to the best of us." He swallowed hard. "The kids ask about you. Every week." That made my heart ache in a way that felt both painful and alive. "Tell them Grandma's still here," I said softly, "and that I never stopped loving them." A few months later, I began volunteering again at the local literacy center. The children there reminded me of the years I spent teaching the laughter. The curiosity, the innocence, untouched by bitterness. Some days, Emma and Noah would video call me. Their voices had grown a little deeper, their laughter brighter. Laura never joined the calls, and I never asked, because I'd learned that, sometimes, the best revenge isn't punishment, it's peace, and peace had finally found me. Peace, I've learned, doesn't come as a wave. It comes in drips like rain through an old roof, steady and soft. After the trial ended, I found myself drawn to silence. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled, just felt. Each morning, I'd take my tea out to the back porch and listen to the world wake up. The birds, the hum of distant traffic, the creak of my old rocking chair. For months, that porch became my sanctuary. Sometimes I'd think about Laura, somewhere far away, starting her version of a new life. Maybe she'd remarried. Maybe she hadn't. Maybe she'd finally realized the pain she caused. I didn't wish her suffering, just awareness. But mostly, thought about my grandkids. The first time Emma called me after everything, I nearly dropped the phone. It was Michael's number, but her little voice came through the line. "Grandma," she said, soft and unsure. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Yes, sweetheart, it's Grandma." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing. Mom said, "I can talk to you sometimes, if I want." I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. I'd like that very much. That first call lasted only 5 minutes. She told me about school, her new friends, a hamster she named Daisy. I told her how proud I was. We didn't talk about the past. Children shouldn't have to carry the weight of their parents' mistakes. But when she hung up, she said something that stayed with me. "I still remember your stories, Grandma. The ones about the garden." I wiped a tear before answering. "Then one day, I'll tell you a new one." In time, the calls became more frequent. Short at first, a check-in, a drawing she wanted to show me. A question about cookies. Then. One day, Michael brought them to visit. I remember that day like it was painted in light. The air smelled like rain and lilacs. I'd baked my old apple pie, the one Emma loved so much. When they arrived, Emma ran ahead of her father. She stopped at the gate, hesitating for just a second before I knelt down, opening my arms. She ran into them so fast that I nearly lost my balance. Her hair smelled like strawberries. Noah followed, quieter but smiling. Michael stood back watching us, his eyes glassy dead inside. The house looked just the same but felt different. Laughter does that. It fills the spaces where pain used to live. Later, after dinner, when the children were drawing at the table, Michael and I sat in the living room. The afternoon light slanted across the old family photos. He said quietly, "They don't really talk about her much." I looked at him. "Do they ask where she is?" "Sometimes," he said. "I tell them she needed time to think about things. I don't tell them everything." "Not yet." "That's wise," I said. He took a deep breath. "I don't know how to thank you, Mom, for still letting us in." I reached for his hand. "Family isn't about who's right, Michael. It's about who chooses to come back." He nodded slowly. His face softened, the lines of guilt starting to ease. As the months turned into a year, my house began to fill again. Not with people all the time, but with warmth. Emma planted flowers with me in the garden. She'd dig little holes with her small hands, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This one's for Grandma," she'd say, "and this one's for hope." Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at her, wondering if she remembered the storm that almost took us apart. But maybe she didn't. Maybe for her, it had just been noise that faded when the sun returned, and that high was grace. One afternoon, I received a letter. No return address, just my name. It's written in handwriting I hadn't seen in months. It was from Laura. For a long while, I didn't open it. It sat on the table, staring at me like an unfinished chapter. I wasn't sure I wanted to read. But curiosity is a powerful thing, and forgiveness, an even greater one. When I finally unfolded the paper, her words were shaky, uneven. "Margaret, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even forgive myself yet. I thought I was losing control of my family, my home, my place. And I blamed you for everything that scared me. You were kind to me when I didn't deserve it. I see that now. I hope one day the children will understand that their mother was human, flawed, frightened, and wrong. Thank you for not teaching them to hate me." Laura sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. And then, without realizing it, I whispered, "I forgive you." Because forgiveness isn't about them hearing it. It's about you needing to say it by the second year. Life had settled into something beautiful again. I started teaching storytelling, workshops at the community center, helping older women put their lives into words. It amazed me how many of them carried stories like mine. Betrayal, family rifts, false accusations, grief that took years to name. But when they spoke, I saw healing bloom in their eyes. One woman told me, "You talk like someone who's been through the storm and still found her umbrella." I laughed softly. Maybe, but the umbrella was patched and I held it tight. We all laughed then, the kind of laughter that only people who've known pain can share. A few months ago, I found an old photo tucked behind a drawer. It was from the year Michael got married. Laura and I standing side by side, smiling. The world still knew between us. I stared at it for a long time. If I could step back into that moment, I think I would have told my younger self, "Be kind, but keep your eyes open. Trust, but don't surrender your truth." I'd still have welcomed her into my home, still have loved her. But maybe I'd have listened a little closer to the silence between her words. Life doesn't give do-overs, though. Only lessons. And this one taught me that even when someone tries to take everything from you, your home, your name, your dignity, the one thing they can never steal is your peace. Because peace doesn't come from them. It comes from knowing who you are when the noise fades down. When I sit on my porch in the evenings, I sometimes hear the wind whisper through the garden Emma planted. The flowers sway gently, their petals brushing one another like forgiveness made visible. And I think maybe that's all life really is. It's a long series of misunderstandings, reconciliations, and moments where we choose love anyway. The sun begins to dip low, painting the sky in gold and amber. I lift my cup of tea, take a slow sip, and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I'm still here, I whispered to the quiet air. And that's enough. You know, when I look back on everything that happened, the police reports, the courtroom, the nights I cried into my pillow wondering how my own family could turn on me, I realized something I wish I'd known all along. People don't always hurt you because they're evil. Sometimes they hurt you because they're afraid. Afraid to lose control, afraid to be small, afraid that love might not be enough. Laura wasn't born cruel. She was born human, and sometimes that's even more dangerous. I used to think justice was about proving who's right. But now I understand. Justice is only half the journey. The other half is peace, and peace doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from letting go. If you've ever been falsely accused, you know that silence can be the loudest pain of all. You start to doubt yourself, question your memory, your worth. But I'm here to tell you that truth does have a way of finding light. It might crawl, it might stumble, but it never stays buried forever. So if you're listening tonight, sitting alone, maybe with tears you can't explain, I want you to remember this. They can take your name for a while. They can take your home, your comfort, even your pride. But they can never take the truth that lives quietly inside you. Hold on to that truth. Nurture it like a seed, because one day it will bloom. And when it does, you'll see that what they meant for your breaking was really your becoming. And maybe, like me, you'll look out your window one morning and realize that peace doesn't come when the world says you're innocent. It comes when you finally believe you are. Would you have forgiven her if it were you? Tell me in the comments. I'd like to know what your heart says and if my story reminded you of your own. Don't forget to subscribe.